Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar is about Microsoft Teams and SharePoint working together. We are Spindustry, and we've been in the business for 25 plus years, and along with our SharePoint work, our team provides several other services. After today's webinar, you will receive a link to the recording and all the slides that you see here today. If you have any questions during today's amazing webinar, you can use the questions feature and we'll answer those at the end if we've got some time. My contact information is also on the last slide of this slide deck, so if you have any questions that we don't get to today, don't hesitate to reach out. Besides today's webinar, we have a lot of others that are free and easy to access. You can find those on spindustry.com/webinars. My name is Kelsey Culbertson. I'll be your host, and I would love to introduce you to our team. We have Tavon Graham, who is our senior SharePoint developer, and Jared Edge, who's our director of SharePoint services. I'm going to pass it over to Jared now so he can tell us what we'll talk about today.
Amazing. So you hear me say this all the time, but when we're figuring out what to deliver for the year of webinars, and when we're sitting here figuring out what goes inside of a webinar, we just look at the experiences that we have with all of our clients and kind of what questions do we get from them and which ones are interesting and which ones are things that we think we should raise out to the public. And just judging by the number of people that are inside of this webinar today, which is a lot, um, uh, we think we pinned the right question for this webinar, and that is, how does SharePoint and Microsoft Teams work together? So we are going to go through and level set a few things. One, we're not here to tell you to run away from this webinar and make a change. That's not what this is about. What we really want to do here is just increase your knowledge, let you know some of the caveats that are inside of both of these two environments, and then show you ways that they can better work together. We do get this question all the time. We have people who come to us where they have invested a lot in Teams, or maybe they didn't really invest in Teams. Teams just grew, and they are now trying to figure out, is there a better way to do it? And we help them with that. And we have people who come to us and they've worked on the SharePoint piece, but haven't really quite figured out how to fully utilize Teams. And we think that experience is so much better when those are together. That's what we want to talk about today. Along the way, we'll also mention kind of the effect on what effect does AI have in this puzzle as well. Like if I have my stuff in Teams, how does AI work with that? If I have it over in SharePoint, how does it work with that? And which one is better to have that in? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. And then we're going to settle on some governance and best practices after we get through all the pieces that we want to show you as well. We will not assume that everyone here uses SharePoint. We won't assume that everyone here uses Microsoft Teams. So we're going to show this from the perspective of we need to have you knowledgeable about specific things. We'll help you get knowledgeable about those, and then we'll attack the governance piece of this at the end, and then kind of finish out with just a little bit of talk on B2B. It might be mixed inside of there, so just bear with us as we go through and talk about it. So a lot to cover. Let's go ahead and get started into it. But I just said a whole bunch of words there to kind of tell you what's going to be in here, but let me sum it up slightly different way. We want you to join our team as we team up to teach your team how to use Microsoft Teams to keep your team's teamwork in top team shape.
At the same time as that, we're going to learn how SharePoint team sites, not Teams sites, will help keep your team secure.
It's just a team-tastic way to team up and learn all about teams, because teams that team together stay together in teams.
So we're going to say the word teams a lot inside of this. And so we just wanted to make sure you guys understood that's what's going to happen. So the conversation can always get confusing because someone says, oh, well, that's a team site. And you're like, are you talking about Microsoft Teams? Or are you talking about SharePoint? What are you talking about? So we're just making a point there. We're going to say the word teams a lot.
Like Jared just said, we're going to say Teams some more right now. So we're going to jump into examining Microsoft Teams. We're going to look at chat, Teams, meetings, apps, and more. And we're going to have Tavon lead us through that.
All right, perfect. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go out to Microsoft Teams and go on a little journey through the application together and kind of hit all those topics that Kelsey just mentioned. So what I'm going to have us do is just start here in Microsoft Teams out in the browser, and we're just going to go down that kind of left-hand navigation that you see in Teams, and we'll talk about a few things there. And again, we're not going to assume that everybody knows everything about Teams, so if you know what we're talking about with some of these things, awesome, just bear with us, there's more coming. And if this is new to you, great, we're glad to stretch your mind. All right, so I'm going to actually have us start with the activity button over on the left-hand side of Teams here. So if anybody hasn't seen activity in Teams up to this point, let me just give you a little background on this and why it's actually one of my favorite pieces of Microsoft Teams. So Teams is an application that can be pretty expansive. If you've been using Teams for any length of time, you've seen it spiral and sprawl out of control, right? Who knows how many chats you have going on? Who knows how many different Microsoft Teams there are, or how many times you get @mentioned in a day, or get meeting invites? And all of that is kind of summarized for you here in the activity tab inside of Teams. Right? We can see, oh, well, I got @mentioned in all these different conversations. We can see, oh, well, I'm actually involved in this meeting that I just got invited to. Or if you have things like Copilot and Teams Premium involved in this picture as well, it can do things for you like give you your meeting summary and highlights here at the same time in this same window. Now, just that single pane of glass and bringing all this information to my eyes, I think is valuable, but also note that this is actionable. Right? Like you see down at the bottom of each and every one of these different activity sections we're clicking through, we can reply. We can attach files. We can send cute little GIFs and emotes and all those other things you want to do in Teams, or just jump over directly to whatever channel or chat a conversation was actually taking place in, so we get that full picture experience. Now, really the thing to think about there again is experience and the user experience, right? Activity brings everything together, and that's kind of a central theme to the Microsoft Teams application overall, is they want to bring your workday together under one umbrella. And Teams does a great job of that. Is there anything you guys want to mention about activity before we jump down to chat?
Nope, not yet.
All right, perfect. So the next thing on our journey here is chat. So again, I'm not going to assume that everybody knows this. So chat is the kind of messaging portion of Teams. We've all sent messages over things like text or other chat applications, and Teams does that for us as well. So there's three kinds of chats that I just want you to be aware of. The first is your one-on-one individual chat with yourself. So in Microsoft Teams, we have this awesome capability to just talk to ourselves, leave ourselves messages, send ourselves files inside of the Teams application. Now, this was something that it wasn't always there, but when they rolled this out, I was excited about it because I often need to get myself information or messages or links from any number of different devices. And we can do that using this self-chat portion of Teams here. And I think that's pretty exciting.
I have to say that I use this a lot as well. I'm just going to confess because I work on multiple machines. I work with multiple clients as well. And when I'm on another machine and I have an image that I'm doing, I do some video editing or image editing on one machine, and I need to put that on use that on another machine on my laptop or what have you. I'll just stick it inside of here, and then it's a very easy way for me to be able to grab it. I know that I could stick it in my OneDrive or something like that and be able to get to it, but this is just like it's just instantaneous and nice.
Yeah, definitely. And again, bringing that power under the same umbrella as everything else you want to do in Teams. So that's your self chat or that place to talk to yourself and leave yourself messages. But like I said, Teams is also a chatting and communication platform, right? We can message other users and other people individually, whether they're within our organization or even we can do this with people outside the organization as well. So here you just see one of these one-on-one chats where we're just talking between the two of us, right? You can see our messages. We can send files here as well. And use all those other wonderful capabilities of a fully fleshed out chatting and meeting platform. We can do calls. We can turn this into a group chat and invite other people into here. We can again send those files and have them actually live in our OneDrive so we can access them from wherever we happen to be. All these wonderful things that you want out of a chat platform, Teams does for you with your one-on-one individual chats as well. And then you heard me say the word group chats just a second ago, and you might have seen where we were clicking around, there was a button to turn this into a group chat. So, like the name suggests, group chats are really just talking with multiple people, right? This group can be a pretty big group or it can be a pretty small group. Here you just see the three of us, right? Where we were chatting about some things the other day, like this time zone document. Now, what I want you to take note of here with this group chat is that it gets out of hand pretty quickly. So we started off, like I said, talking about a time zone document and then an invoice, and all of a sudden we jump in with some information about Copilot, and then later on a PTO request, and all this is in this one chat, right? You might have multiple group chats going on to help split this up a little bit, but this is a very common experience and something that a lot of people mentioned to us when we start talking to them about Teams for the first time is, wow, my Teams and my group chats have started getting a little out of control. I don't really have a good way to tell if we're done with the conversation or if we're moving on to the next topic.
And to emphasize that, look at how much information's in here. You might think that this took us a few days to get to this far, but no, it didn't. This is from 4:02 yesterday, and down here at the bottom, it's like 4:11, and that's a lot of chats that happen in there, and they're not all about the same thing. And the original intent of this was to talk about this one document, which we never ever finished doing. We got sidetracked inside of here because it was a place to be able to talk to Kelsey and Tavon. And so in this what you're doing is you're fundamentally saying, okay, if I need to talk to Tavon and Kelsey, this is where I'm going to do it. Versus saying, if I need to talk about benefits, I'm going to do it here. If I need to talk about the time zones, I'm going to do it in a different place. And so you're not, group chats are not about the topic, group chats are about the people. And that methodology sometimes leads to a bunch of information in here where I can't find whether there was an answer, what was the answer, how did we approach it, what did we do after it, what were the follow-ups from it. I can't find any of that information. And when I want to come back 3 days later and do that or add to the conversation, this is not necessarily the ideal scenario.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know some of you might be thinking when you hear that, oh, but I can like reply or I can mention people in here. Yes, that's absolutely true, and that is helpful. But at the end of the day, we want this to be an even better, even cleaner experience for our teams while we're working together out of Microsoft Teams.
So we're going to contrast that for you in just a second. We'll get there.
Yep, but before we jump down to the Teams section and show you another way we could do this conversation, we just want to highlight a few more pieces of group chats, such as the shared tab. Right, you saw that in our one-on-one chats. It's here as well. Now you might be wondering, Tavon, where do these files go? Again, OneDrive. And that starts to get messy in the context of a group chat, right? Because all of a sudden we've got three different people in this group chat. That's three different OneDrives that can be involved, sending files back and forth. Oh no, I'm going to get lost. I'm not going to know where my files actually live. And
Yep.
that's not the experience we want to have.
And if we look at that from a governance point of view, should someone be able to put a sensitive document and share that inside of this group chat instead of putting it in the place where we're supposed to put sensitive documents, or something where we have planned to have it as a secure environment, right? So there's I don't want to call it a loophole, but there's a loophole here, right? And we need to make sure that we are thinking about that in our governance and how we're doing things. All right. Excellent. Go ahead, Tavon.
Absolutely. All right, so one or two more things to just note about group chats, just to show you that they can be pretty cool at the same time as we think there might be better options. Next to shared, you see that little plus icon. We'll look more at that when we get down to Teams, but we can add tabs to our group chats and add additional applications and other resources that are kind of relevant to this group chat so we can access them easily. We also have this nice little Meet Now button. We like that a lot, right? When we have a group chat and we just want to quickly get everybody together instead of scheduling something, just being able to click a single button and say we're all on an audio or video call now is pretty sweet.
Yeah. So I'll give you a common thing for chat, right? That I see people use it for, and that I started down the path of doing this and then modified myself or modified the way I do it. And so I used to for like one-on-ones and things like that with my team. I used to have like, here's my chat with that person, and I'd go in there and start talking to them. We just put our one-on-one stuff in there. It's not that it didn't work. It's that it was clouded with a bunch of other conversations that we were having as well. And even when I meet with my management team, we started out with a group chat for that as well. And again, it became clouded with a bunch of other things we were talking about that weren't really related to that. So one of my favorite things about group chats is being able to hit this meet now button and click on it, and everybody who's in that chat automatically shows up on there. I don't have to invite them one by one. That's just awesome stuff because I need to talk right then. But we found that there might be a better way, and we're going to share some of that with you.
All right, perfect. So I think we can jump down to the Teams button here in Teams. And again, I apologize on Microsoft's behalf for the nomenclature being the word team over and over and over and over again. And you're going to see it in even more places as we keep talking. So what you're looking at here is the Teams interface inside of Microsoft Teams. For anyone who doesn't really know what a team is to Teams, a individual team is kind of an organizational unit, right? It's kind of one of those building blocks for the bigger picture of a Microsoft Teams ecosystem. Here you can see we have several teams that we're a member of, right? We have this TMI HR team. We have the SpinMed projects team, and then some other teams listed out as well down under the hidden section. So these are a great way to help us stay a little bit more organized than just having a bunch of kind of random group chats, right? We know that conversations relating to the TMI HR team happen in the TMI HR team.
Yep. So let me before you jump a little bit deeper into it, let me set context here for this, right? I think we commonly think of Teams as a place to store files for a set of people. So I gave my HR department a Microsoft team, and they should put their files here, right? And we're going to talk more about that in governance as far as how that becomes somewhat of a problem down the road. And a lot of you on here already know that. But I would like to change the way you think about this and put another context on it, which will help you decide whether you really need a team or not, right? So we think of teams as the location where we get to the resources and have conversations about different topics. So, for example, my HR team commonly has conversations around benefits. They need a place to do that. They commonly have conversations around FMLA. They need a place to do that. Same with learning resources or whatever else that we have set up for channels for those. And those channels become that place where they can have those conversations. And while they're having those conversations around FMLA or benefits, they also need other resources to be able to have those conversations effectively. So we put those other resources right here available to them so that they can get to the information they need while they're having these conversations around benefits or conversations around FMLA. And I think that is a more organized view of the way you could look at teams. Instead of, oh, it's just a place to store documents, I may use a team and not actually use the files tab here. I might use other libraries that are already existing out in a SharePoint site, and I just need to be able to get to those resources from here, right? And I'm going to put that little bit of context on there so we can say, all right, I see a different way of looking at teams, and it doesn't have to all be about the files tab. All right, so
Yeah.
go ahead, Kayvon.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to jump back to posts for just a second here, but we will come back to some of these tabs and show you even more interesting and fun things that you can do with those. But I wanted to spend a second showing you how much better just conversations can be in a Teams ecosystem where we have good teams and channels set up. Right. So like we saw with that group chat that we had an example of, it was very difficult to tell what we were talking about and keep those things organized. But over in Teams, we have what we call posts. I think posts is a bad name for it. I would call it conversations. So we can start as many of these posts or conversations in one of these channels as we want, and it's a great way for us to actually keep those discussions and those replies to an initial message grouped together, right? So what you can see down here is even just in this benefits team, the HR group is having a lot of different conversations all at once, right? As you scroll through here, you'll find that we are talking about a change in benefits for AWB Health. There was a post earlier on about benefits for all. Pretty exciting, right? We all want our benefits. And we keep the replies to those conversations under one roof, right? It's a self-contained conversation with the additional context of those other tabs and other resources in the same place that we just mentioned. And I think that's a much better chatting experience, being able to say, oh, well, I don't want to have to sort through and scroll through 100 messages talking about the Christmas party we're planning. I just want to find the conversation about benefits packages and be able to reply to that discussion instead of looking at the broader group picture.
Yep. And I agree with you. That's a better way to kind of look at it and focus it. I feel as if I could go find what I'm looking for this way. I know we were talking about FMLA. Oh, yeah, it was the quarterly summary. Let me read through. Oh, that's what she said, or that's where the link was, or what have you. I feel like that's a better way to be able to focus your conversations and be able to get to the information you're looking for. And they keep making it so that it's, has a little bit more functionality along the way and it's prettier. So I'm going to give you guys my wish list for what they could do to improve this at Microsoft, and you feel free to share this with Microsoft, right? I think that when we're finished with a conversation, we should be able to collapse this conversation or even say that or check it off to say that this conversation is complete. So I don't have to look at it anymore. I think that would be amazing if they had a next step there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the other major portion of Teams that we've kind of hinted at, but I want to spend just another couple seconds going over is these tabs up at the top. Right? So when we talk about tabs in Teams, again, think of that as a way to bring resources and bring context to the conversation that's going on. You'll always have posts and you'll always have files sitting there, but we can add more of these tabs and they don't have to be just Microsoft resources. Right? You see here YouTube, our HR team, they need to get a lot of information from YouTube, or they have YouTube videos that they're responsible for maintaining. Wouldn't it be nice if they could just pull that up in this one Teams interface that they're actually used to working from? Well, now they can, right? Because we added in this tab. Or you heard us mention earlier other libraries. We'll talk more about libraries and SharePoint in general in just a little bit, but SharePoint might keep our files a little bit more organized and well split apart than just a Files tab does. We'll show you more about that in a bit. But note that we can add SharePoint resources here as well, and Power BI and things like Power Apps that you might have created, or even a tab that just represents an individual document. The sky is the limit with these tabs that you want to add into Teams. Just be aware that this is a very, very powerful capability that I think a lot of people miss out on because they just don't know that it's there or what it can
And,
really do for them.
and let's sum that up, okay? So my HR site has, or my HR team has a site over in SharePoint, and we've governed it, and we have everything all squared away over there. But they don't like to work out of SharePoint. There's nothing wrong with that. That can be said out loud. It's okay. They don't like to work out of SharePoint. So we said, okay, great. You like working out of Teams? Let's let you work out of Teams, and we're just going to put everything that they need in front of them here, so they have that one source to come to do their job on that day, right? That's what you're providing here inside of Teams. Now, having said that, I just want to mention, I know that some of you are coming here with other ways that you're using Teams currently. There are some who are out there who have let's use HR as the example again, but they have HR team out there, or just the HR Microsoft Teams out there. And they have a general tab. And what they're doing in that is they're letting everyone in the company come in to that HR team, and everyone can see or communicate through, say, the general tab. IT sometimes does this same type of thing. Then they're putting in private channels to lock down different conversations and sets of files and such for that department, for in this case HR. So there's nothing wrong with that, but there might be better ways to do that utilizing SharePoint, because there's some things you could do in SharePoint that you would never be able to do inside of a channel here, right? And so we want to talk about those and broaden your mind out on those as well. So I'm just kind of giving you a preview of what I'm going to start talking about in just a few minutes over here.
All right, awesome. So because I mentioned earlier that Teams is kind of envisioned to bring your whole work experience under one roof, there are a couple of other tools I want to point out to you here as well before we dive into SharePoint. First is just the calendar, right? If you've seen Teams, you're probably familiar with the fact that it also has this kind of calendar app built in. And it's a good calendar, right? It does a good job of showing me what I'm up to in a day and letting me, very easily schedule meetings and change some settings about them. But one of the most common requests out there to Microsoft was I would really like to be able to say, hey, show me Kelsey's calendar while I'm looking at mine in Teams. So if anyone hasn't noticed this, not too long ago, if we hit the kind of three dots over on the left-hand side, you'll find there's an option here for calendar new. Ooh, exciting, right?
I
And
feel
this
like we
calendar,
need I feel like we need some kind of theme or something like that whenever we show something new in one of our webinars. Like it's like da, 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 new feature, right? So, but this is it, right? So you see the new keyword there. That's all you get for today.
yep, yep. So eventually we'll have that more kind of fanfare for it. But for today, just know that this is exactly what people have been asking for, right? It basically brings that almost Outlook-like calendar experience into the Teams world, where now we can say, okay, add some extra calendars here. We can say, okay, I want to actually set up some views for myself of these calendars and be able to switch between them. And I think this is going to be a great resource for all those people out there who have been asking for some improvements to the Teams calendar. So just a couple of other pieces of Teams we want to highlight as well. Calls in OneDrive. If you've ever made a call in Teams, you know calls is there. It's just a place to see calls that have happened and kind of under that one roof. OneDrive is actually a pretty cool experience in Teams because it doesn't just stop at OneDrive. It also shows you things like pinned SharePoint libraries that you have and lets you actually open resources from those different locations. So I definitely get a lot of use out of this in my day-to-day work so that I can stay in the Teams umbrella while working on some of my SharePoint resources, even if we don't have a Microsoft team set up for exactly that particular library I want. But then there are some other cool apps here as well. There's Power BI and etc. But I just want to show you Planner because not everybody knows what Planner is or that it's out there. This is actually a pretty great project management and task management tool that just lives here in the Microsoft ecosystem. Now, what you're looking at right now is Planner from a broader scope, right? All the different plans that we have access to is what they're called, but we can actually set this up as a tab inside of a individual channel as well, just to show tasks and projects and etc. that are kind of related to that one actual team or that one actual channel. For instance, what we have used this for in the past internally is keeping track of tasks that are going on relating to a particular client that we're working with. So we can see those tasks from our team, from our channel that relates to that individual client. So Planner is a pretty great resource. If you haven't looked into it, definitely would recommend it. And then for anybody who knows me, you know that I am kind of obsessed with automation. I'm an automation guy. I love helping companies work on workflows and automations. I just want to point out pretty quickly here for you, there's a fully functional workflows app ties into Power Automate inside of Teams as well. And this is pretty great for two reasons. First, for those tasks that you want Power Automate involved in relating to Teams, right? Like save a message over to my OneNote, or notify a team when a planner task gets completed, or schedule my reply, but build in extra workflow logic there. There are certainly Microsoft Teams applications to Power Automate. But also, if anyone just wants to be creating workflows, you can do that here from Teams, right? Again, their goal is to bring this whole experience of your workday under one roof with Teams. And this Workflows app is a pretty great thing for that for people like me who build a lot of automation. All
Awesome.
right, so sorry, go ahead.
I said awesome.
Ah, perfect. So that's a pretty high level overview of some things that we want you to know about Teams and to start stretching your mind about. But now, why don't we take a look at some of those SharePoint things that we mentioned, right? And how it can help us stay even more organized with our files.
That is a perfect idea, Tavon, and a great segue into the other part of this webinar. So we said the name Teams a million times, but now we'll jump into saying SharePoint a million times. So Jared, can you kind of take us into examining SharePoint?
Yep. And just as a reminder, what I'm going to try to do here, right? I'm gonna educate a little bit about pieces that we see inside of our clients' SharePoint environments and how it's being used in some very creative ways we've seen it being used. But then tie that back to how the two can work together, SharePoint and Teams together. So I'm going to introduce you to our environment and just give you a few things that SharePoint does really, 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 really well that maybe does even better than what Microsoft Teams does, right? And so we don't want to just say we're going to be at a Teams environment, we're only going to use Teams. We want to say, what does SharePoint have to offer? And for those here who don't know what SharePoint has to offer, you're going to see a little bit of that today. For those who are here using SharePoint, I'm going to make these things magically piece together and show you how they could be utilized inside of Microsoft Teams as well. So that's where we're going, right? So I'm going to talk about department sites. I'm going to talk about collaboration sites. We're going to talk about external sites in just a little while as well. I'm going to show the fact if your organization hasn't jumped into List yet, it's something you need to be looking at. That should be your next step, right? Because lists are super powerful. And if you're not using all these things, you're not really taking advantage of the SharePoint environment. And then we're going to talk about search as well and how that compares to what the search is over inside of Microsoft Teams. And then I'm going to show you how these two things can be connected together, even from your intranet point of view. So let's get started. I'm going to jump over into my environment. So if you've been to any of our webinars, you've seen us use the TMI environment. And so I'm just going to give you a quick tour of it. So what am I solving by having this intranet? So almost every company that we deal with, even if they started out in Teams and they come to us and say, we're trying to figure out how to use Teams a little bit better. And we say, well, what is it you want to do? Well, we want to be able to push information out to the company. Oh, well, you need an intranet, right? That's the best way to do that. And that's in SharePoint. But we want to work out of Teams. No problem. I've got you covered there as well. We'll talk about that. So what does this intranet do for me just at face value, right? So on here, a user, a brand new person to the company, now knows how to get to all my departments and get information there. So if they need HR information, they know how to get to it. They know about all of our different locations that we have and can find out information about each of those locations. They know that we are, in this particular company, we're very client-centric. So we have a client center where you can find out information about our clients and then see relevant things that pertain to your aspect in the job. We have applications that they can get to, so making this a one-stop shop for our company, so that I don't have to remember the link to the policy portal, right, or bookmark that somewhere. I can just come here and click on it. I don't have to remember how to get to some of these other pieces that are in here, the status change tracking. I can just come here and click on the link and get to it. These are applications we use on a daily basis. But also helpful links, because over time we saw that people were searching for specific things. We wanted to elevate those to just a single click from the menu. These links are available everywhere you are in SharePoint and can also be available inside of Teams. What are you saying to me, Jared? Yes, they can be available inside of Teams as well. Okay, so I'm going to show that. Then we are a company that likes to encourage people to override the default functionality of search, because it can be so much better. And so we install the PnP search web parts. I'll give you a demo of that in just a second. So even at a low hanging fruit range, right? I have solved a lot of problems because my new employees can come in here and find out everything they need to be able to do work inside of SharePoint. So you could say on your onboarding, just go to SharePoint, right? So I'm going to take you to look at my two sites that I have. One is the HR and one is the IT. So my human resources, they needed that place that an intranet serves for them, right? They needed a place to be able to share with everyone. So they wanted to have the employee handbook out here, right? So great, a link to the employee handbook, that makes sense. Everyone in the company should be able to get to this. Could you imagine putting that in Teams? So even if I had this open channel inside of Teams, I would be storing this like as a document in a library somewhere and having to tell someone to get to the employee handbook. You need to go to this team, then go on the Files tab, then go look for this through this library that I have there, and you'll find the employee handbook, right? And so that's a different story than saying go to the intranet, all the things you need are there for all the departments. Hopefully you see where I'm going there, right? They also have a link to the training, because that's something people usually ask them for. They have a link to the new hire site in a couple different places. But my HR department also has another site called Health and Benefits, another site called the HR new hire, or the new hire center. Sorry. They also have a private site, and they're the only ones that see this link. They also have a link to the policy portal, because people often ask them about policies, and they say, here's the link to the policy portal right from here. They have how-to guides that are good for them. And then they also have a manager's resources site that only managers see this link. No one else will see this link unless you're a manager. So they're able to control those things from their SharePoint environment, which is really kind of cool, right? And so I'll take a look at my IT site, and I'll come back to this HR site real quick. So my IT site, these guys, very similar, needed a place to be able to share with everybody, so we gave them that, right? There's lots of stuff that IT wants to share with the rest of the company. In fact, If you asked every department, I bet every department has at least one thing that they want to share with the rest of the organization and could benefit from a site like this. Because when they find the one thing they want to share, there's always a second thing they want to share, and then a third thing they want to share. And they start figuring out how to really utilize these sites, and it makes sense for them, right? But inside of here, I have multiple things. So this is a page. This page is grabbing a lot of different things together. News, right? Different types of news, general news and security based news. It gives you contact information to get to us. This is a much better way than having, again, an open channel inside of a Microsoft team that everyone could come to. I like this intranet concept a little bit better. I can form things the way that I want them to be formed. But this site also takes advantage of list. So Tavon, can I put a list inside of Microsoft Teams?
Yeah, absolutely. Those apps that I mentioned earlier, one of those is called Microsoft Lists, and it can work with your existing lists or be a great place to make new ones as well.
Right. So what I'm saying here is not that, oh, SharePoint can do things that Teams can't, like SharePoint can do lists and Teams can't. No, they can both do it. But in your Teams environment, what you would really be doing is pointing someone to a link that took them to this list, and they may not have context around this list. So as you're looking at this list, I have a title column with all my titles of the vendors that we can use as my vendor list. I have whether they are approved or denied currently. I have a max column that has an amount in it, but I don't really know what that max means. Does it mean that's the most I can spend with them per year, per month? What does that really mean? There's no context around this list. And then I have a bunch of information on how to contact people inside of their website links and things like that that they can use. So certainly I could say to my team, so let's say it's just the IT team is the only ones that look at this list. If they were the only ones, I could just say in one meeting, oh yeah, max means this, and everybody would know, right? So that's not a problem. But when I'm opening this up to the public to be able to come and see, there's no context around this, and they don't fully understand what this list really means, right? So one thing that I can do inside of SharePoint to make this a better experience for my users is I can use pages. And Teams doesn't offer you that ability to then create pages for these things. So I have a page here that is centered around vendor suppliers, right? And inside of it, I have information that gives you context on how we feel about our suppliers and what we expect out of our suppliers, right? So it had these first two sentences. And then also this last sentence here says, this list provides the name and contact information and also the max amount that you can spend with a vendor supplier without additional approval. Then I took that same list and I put a view of that list right here. This is the same information that's over in that list. It comes from that other list, right? And it's just showing them the approved people instead of showing them the ones that are denied or ones that are pending and such. It also gives them a way to react and say, hey, there's a vendor that's not on here that I want to use. You can submit it through there. It also gives them a way to do a survey for the vendors as well to keep us, to let us know how it was going with those vendors. We want to be able to make sure that everything's going well for you. So this page gave me context. That's something that you're not really getting out of Microsoft Teams. If you are here and you've been trying to use Microsoft Teams as an intranet, that's not what it's for. But SharePoint is and does it really well. And then you're going to say to me, well, can't I just do this over here and get it to show up over there? How do I do that? I'm going to show you how that's done. So great things that I can do here. Let me jump back to my HR department for a second. And let's go look at their private area. So their HR team only. So no one else in the world can get to this. This is a very secure site that only my HR department can get to. And as we were talking earlier, I said my HR team commonly has meetings. They have conversations around reports. They have conversations around FMLA. They have conversations around a travel request and some other things. Now, to rest assured, they do have a lot of other sets of documents that they talk about, right? But these are the ones that are most important to them, so they put them on their left-hand navigation. Inside of here on their homepage for that only they can see, they have important links to get to different places. They've got, data sitting here. They've got Power BI reports that they can drill into. And then they have the most recent documents. So when something gets changed, everybody can see, oh, there was a change to this that brings my mind back to that particular item. That's not something you're getting out of just using that team and that files tab inside of there, right? But Jared, can I just somehow get this to work together? Why didn't Microsoft make it so it could work together? Oh, great question. it can work together, right? And there's a lot of options that you have sitting here. So let me just talk about a few of those, and then I'll jump back over into this environment. Let's just use FMLA for just an example. In my FMLA, I have documents that we're storing, and I followed some best practices along with these. So some of you understand like naming schemes and things like that. So I have naming schemes inside of my documents and that kind of stuff. But the best practices I'm talking about is like I gave a content type to this to identify the type of document that it is for SharePoint. So SharePoint understands what type of document it is. So I just called it an FMLA document. I also have, when the case gets assigned, we assign it to a specific person in our team. So here's what the workflow for this used to be, or the process flow used to be for this. They had a file share, and in that file share, they had a file called FMLA request. A folder called FMLA request. And inside that folder, they had loose documents, so a bunch of documents looking like this. And then they had 4 folders, one for Patty, one for Jared, one for Pam, and one for Aiden. So they had those sitting there. And what they would do is they would meet when a new file came in. They would meet about who was the person who's supposed to take that over. And when they decided, they would move that file into that bucket, into that folder. Then they would break out their typewriter, right? And then they send an email to the person that the case is about, and they'd send an email to the person the case got assigned to so that they would know that they've been doing it. They did that whole process manually. We said, rather than do that, when we bring this over into SharePoint, one, let's get rid of your folders. That's a whole different conversation, so don't worry about that, right? Let's get rid of your folders, but let's put a metadata column here that says who's it's assigned to so that you could, filter it by that. You could group it by that and have it even look like folders. That looks like folders to me, right? So really cool stuff. But then we also said, let's put your whole process inside of here. So what happens now is they drop a new document in here. For time purposes, I won't do that. But then when they they have their meeting, so to figure out who's the person that needs to be able to work this case. And then let's just say that this wasn't filled in, saying Patty. So they come in and they say, okay, well, we're going to assign that to Aiden, right? So they type in Aiden's name. Boom, they're good to go. And they save that, what saved itself. And then once that's done, all of a sudden a workflow kicks off behind the scenes, goes and grabs this information. It knows what to send to the person this case is about, and knows what to send to to Aiden himself. So it takes care of all that stuff behind the scenes for them. Okay. All we're saying here is I solved a process, and I did that with workflow, but I also used metadata in here, so this column worth of information, to be able to assist with that. Let's go over to the Teams version of this, right? So let's just say in Microsoft Teams that we gave them a tab for FLA so they could keep their conversations organized, like Tavon was talking about just a little while ago. So that's a plus, right? But then let's just say they were using the Files tab. Well, it turns out when you go to this Files tab, this says FMLA request, right? When I get to this one on benefits and I click it, this one says benefits, right? When I go to learning resources and I click on that one, this one says learning resources, but in reality, that's not the full name. That's not the full path. So I'm going to go to the SharePoint site that's behind the scenes of this, right? Because all these documents you're putting in the Files tab live in a SharePoint library behind the scenes. And now we see the true name of that. It is learning resources, but it's just a folder inside of the documents library. And turns out there's a folder for benefits. There's one for FMLA requests. There's one in the general tab. There's one for the general channel. There's one for the learning resources channel, and so forth. So they're all just folders inside of one library. So what are you trying to say here, Jared? I'm glad you asked that. So let's go to the FMLA request, and let's say that they wanted to be able to do that same workflow scenario. The first thing they'd have to do is add a column to this. But when they add a column here, guess what, my friends? That column gets added to all of these other folders as well, because this is just one library and the columns are attached to the library. So they then said, well, in benefits, we want to do some workflow. So we need like a couple of more columns to that where they're adding that to the entire library, which then adds it to all these others. So that's not an efficient way to be able to work with this data. Okay, so in SharePoint, I can manage that better. So as you saw over here, I'm able to do it to this library. And then if I have another library, like say reports, I could put other metadata over there, or meetings, I could put other metadata over here if I wanted to. Each of these are separate, right? And I can put the metadata that I want on each of those and have them involved in different multiple workflows, right? So let's look again at my FMLA request to remind you of what it looks like, so that you see there's no tricks up my sleeve. 3 minutes ago, I modified this guy, right? So I'm going to go back to my Teams experience here, and I'm going to go to FMLA. What we teach our clients to do is say, hey, let's not use the Files tab. Let's use that SharePoint site where we have that governed library, which has lots of functionality inside of it already, and let's map that over here for them. And here, my friends, is the same library. 3 minutes ago, I made this change to Aiden right here. This is the library from SharePoint. Other cool things about this is a security aspect of this that we'll talk about a little bit more deeper in just a few seconds. If I was to accidentally allow someone else into the Office 365 group, the Microsoft 365 group that controlled this set of channels, this team, and all of a sudden they were able to get to this, they still wouldn't be able to get to this tab, because when they click on it, it would say, oh yeah, you don't have access to the site where this lives at. And that is a huge plus as well. And some of you have been trying to figure out how to handle that for a very long time. That's the secret there, right? We have a governed SharePoint site, and we are putting in front of our people. Remember the meaning of Teams that we gave you, which is I want to be able to communicate or have conversations around different items, and I want all the resources I need here to be able to have that conversation effectively. That's what we've just done for this HR team inside of SharePoint. So that's a very cool thing to be able to do. All right, let me go back. So one other thing that I'd like to say, inside of here as I'm talking about this is, so I showed you list, I showed you collaboration, I showed you department sites. Tavon and I are going to talk about collaboration sites and external sites in a second. But I'm going to just go into search real quick, and how the governed SharePoint site is going to have better searchability than Teams will. Now, I don't know how many of you have searched inside of Teams for something, but I'm just going to say it may not be the best experience in the world. Are they improving it? You saw a recent improvement within the last month or two, which was fantastic addition to Teams, how they allowed us to do a search, but split it up into these different things, right? I thought that was really cool. But overall, what we're missing out of here is the ability to filter, the ability to filter by content type. Like, I want to filter by all policies, or filter by all contracts, or filter by all regulated documents, things like that. And so I'm missing out on some of those things when I'm using SharePoint as when I'm using Teams as like a dumping ground. So we can give you a better experience when you're over inside the SharePoint environment, right? So I go here and I'm going to go to my search here. I'm going to click here. One thing that the out-of-the-box SharePoint search doesn't do, like when you come up here to do it, one thing it doesn't do, and one thing Teams doesn't do, I don't know why, is they don't tell you how many documents were found how many results were there. They don't ever tell you that, which is just weird, right? Because every search engine in the world tells you how many results you got back, whether it's millions or just 10, right? And so here I'm just going to search for the word policy. Oops, I'll spell it correctly. And it'll go out just like any other keyword search engine would do. And this is leveraging the regular search under the hood. We're just displaying it a little bit differently. The tool that we're doing here, if you haven't been to any of our other webinars and you haven't seen this before, this is called the PNP search web parts. You can just look that up, and it's free. It doesn't cost anything. It's out there. It's built by the community, and it's perfectly sound. Every client that we've ever implemented SharePoint for, we actually put this into their environment. So 285 results came back, and they have like the word policies, So it's finding all the inflections. It's doing the same thing that the out-of-the-box search does. But I turned it into an Amazon-style search instead. Because I use some best practices like content types and managed metadata, what I see over here is the ability to filter this based upon the type of content, right? I can't do that inside of your Microsoft Teams environment, but I can do that very easily over here in the SharePoint environment. So if I said, oh, yeah, I was just looking for ones that are marked as a policy document, boom, I had 30 of those, and it's going to bring this down from 200 and whatever down to 30. So that's really cool to be able to do. But all that metadata I'm putting in there that I want to be able to use as well, it's also available to me, right? So in this case, these documents were tagged with their department, who the department owner is for this. And I can say, yeah, I was looking for marketing documents, and check that, and they'll narrow it down to 5. So that's a more Amazon style search where you click Prime, or you click 4-star, or you click the manufacturer name. That's a better type of search. I can do that here in SharePoint, and I can do it if we have governance around and we're all using the same plan for how we work with documents. We're all using best practices along the documents and those types of things, which is something that you commonly don't get to do inside of Teams, because the way you roll out teams is you just started giving teams to people, even if it was like, okay, I assessed it first to see that your department needed a team. I'm giving you those, but I'm not really giving you a lot of education on the fact that this files tab is going to become a dumping ground for you instead of a very clean environment that has metadata around it or content types around it, all the best practices that are needed for SharePoint to be able to grow. And we'll talk about some of that growth means in just a few minutes when we start talking about governance. All right, so Tavon, do you want to add anything into that whole piece there?
No, I think you did a great job there. I mean, the only thing that I would mention is just one more highlight of the SharePoint search capabilities and those PnP search modules. Because one of the more common questions we get asked is, can I customize this? I want it to look different, or I want extra refiners on there. And this is totally customizable. So just another wonderful point in favor of this SharePoint governed search approach.
I
I
totally agree.
heard some of my favorite words, some words that I know are your favorites as well. I heard best practices and I heard governance. So, if you guys don't mind, we talked about SharePoint, we talked about Teams, and now I think we should jump right into that governance and best practices. How to use these in a way that sets us up for success in our organization.
Awesome.
All right.
So I'm going to just lead us off, and then I'll let you jump into it, Tavon. So what we're talking about here is, regardless of whether you're going to use SharePoint or whether you're just going to use Teams, or whether you're going to use SharePoint and Teams together, doesn't matter. You still need governance around that. So if you're in a total Teams experience, right, that road that you're going down, you need to figure out, when are we going to clean up the teams? What is the trigger for cleaning up a teams? How are we going to secure those teams in a good manner? Do we allow an owner of that team to be able to be the one who invites new people in it, or do we have IT is the ones who can invite people into those teams? Is a request to IT to get that done? Are we going to allow external share? There's a lot of decisions that need to be made around just doing it in a holistically Teams way of doing this. If you switch over to just SharePoint and you say, I'm only going to use SharePoint and then we'll just use Teams just for chatting and things, same thing. I need a ton of governance over there to figure out how we're best going to utilize SharePoint and make it so that it grows and we have a 20-year experience with SharePoint instead of a 5-year experience or a 1-year experience with SharePoint, right? We don't want to restart the wheel. So no matter which direction you're going, you need to have governance. But what we've seen is, when a company goes into governance and starts talking about it and recognizes that these two environments can coexist and work together very well, their governance ends them in a place where they are using SharePoint and Teams together and doing it very effectively. It's the way to get to that plan. All right, so jump in, Tavon, and let's start talking about some pieces of this governance.
Sure. So the first thing that I want to make sure we highlight is security, and a couple of security differences to keep in mind while you decide kind of how you're going to go down this road of SharePoint Teams or SharePoint and Teams. So you heard us mention the word Microsoft 365 group earlier. And for anyone who's not aware, every Microsoft team on Earth is associated to a Microsoft 365 group. They just have to be. A Microsoft 365 group is how Teams security is maintained. It's how you give people access to Teams. It's how we make sure that the right people can do sharing, all those kind of things. So these Microsoft groups are a powerful tool when it comes to making sure that we stay secure in Teams if we understand them. But we always need to point out a couple of extra things to bear in mind with these Microsoft 365 groups. So a lot of people think, oh, I made a team, it came with a group. If I add someone into that group, they just get access to this Microsoft team. That is unfortunately not the case. So what you might or might not be aware of, right, is that Microsoft 365 groups come with a ton of extra stuff, right? They come with a shared Outlook inbox. They come with a calendar. They come with this SharePoint site behind the scenes and that SharePoint library we saw. They come with Planner. They come with a Power BI workspace. All these just various different applications in the Microsoft realm, they're kind of tied together by this Microsoft group in ways that we don't always recognize, right? Because again, I just made a team. It told me that it had to make a group for it. Great. But I didn't know that I created this planner. I didn't know that I created this shared inbox. And now you have to think about that from a security perspective as well, right? Because this is a recipe for oversharing. Let me give you a real example, right? So maybe we've got this planner here that we're looking at. And we're doing some sort of a Christmas party this year, and HR is in charge of it, and they're keeping track of all those tasks in this planner. They just saw, someone in HR saw we have a planner. Great, let's use that to do our task management. Okay, awesome. Well, now they want to invite someone from, say, finance or someone from, say, IT to come help them out with this Christmas party. Okay, so they might not realize it, but by inviting you into this planner, we're really adding you to that Microsoft group. I just mentioned about 20,000 different apps that it's tied to, right? SharePoint, Outlook, Planner, Power BI, all these different things. Now, by adding you to what I thought was just Planner, I really made you a member of that group. And I really just shared everything with you.
Yep. And so I just added Zach and made him a member of HR is what I basically did. Now he's seeing all the things that Office 365 or Microsoft 365 group has access to. So I'm not saying that can't be controlled, right? I mean, it is a matter of you need to consider that in your governance. That's what we're trying to open your mind to. So consider that in your governance, determine whether that's something that is good for your organization or not, and then go down the path, right? Have those tools in there to be able to audit those types of things, have that all available. The answer here might be don't let anyone other than IT add members to a group. Stop them from doing that. And that might suffice, right? So you just have to keep these things in mind that it could happen. So we got to be very careful. There's what we're trying to say to you.
And one more thing that I want to kind of, use to connect the dots here with that, right? We mentioned earlier the possibility of having a well-governed, well-controlled, well-secured SharePoint library and just associating that to Teams using one of those tabs. Well, if we are using that approach, then me accidentally oversharing this entire Microsoft group by adding you to my planner, I didn't necessarily just give you access to our FMLA documents.
Right.
Right? We can stay even more secure by leveraging SharePoint for SharePoint things and just using Teams as the interface on top.
Exactly. So keep that in mind. Okay. So think about that, figure that out in your governance, and see, how does that fit in, and which way do you want to approach it there? Okay. All right. Awesome. So
And then
I
we
talked a little
mentioned,
bit. Oh, go ahead,
go
Taylor.
ahead. All right. We mentioned a few other best practices as well in the SharePoint space that you can take advantage of in your Teams ecosystem as well, right? Like content types and managed metadata to help keep your content discoverable. And that's 10 times easier, like we said, if we're using a dedicated standalone SharePoint library to host our documents, as opposed to that Files tab, where we're actually impacting a lot more than we think we might be by using those content types and metadata.
Exactly. And then these last two here, or these two, I want to talk about for just a second. So the SharePoint journey is not just about SharePoint. The Teams journey is not just about Teams, right? As soon as you start putting documents in there, you have to start asking yourselves other questions. How long should this document reside here? What is the legal requirement that we have for how long this document should live here? What happens to this document when we no longer want it to live here? Where does it go? Or how do I prevent someone from removing this document? Because if we get audited within this time period, we need this document to be here. That's retention. And you need to start thinking about retention from day one. So it needs to be part of your conversation, even though what we see is most companies are not going to be able to implement that retention effort until, let's say, a year between like the first year and second year of being in SharePoint. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. But you do want to have that conversation ahead of time, because you want your libraries to be set up in a way that makes it easy for retention to be implemented. You want your teams to be set up in a way that makes it easy for retention to be set up, a little bit easier. So those are things we want you to consider as you're going through this. You need to consider those things. Will SharePoint in a governed environment allow me to do retention easier? Let's do it that way. Do I need a plan still for how to do retention inside of Teams? Yep, you probably do, right? So consider those for both sides. That's part of your governance. But sensitivity is a different aspect of it. So for those who don't know what sensitivity is, let's say Tavon is the HR manager and has access to, he has permissions, right? Access to all the HR documents, including the stuff for FMLA, which should never be seen by anyone inside the company other than who we specifically say it should be, and also should never be seen by anyone outside of the company, right? So it's very, very sensitive information. And for those who don't really equate to HR, maybe think about finance holding onto an Excel document that has the top salaries of that are in the company. We don't want that to leave out of finance's hands, things like that. But Tavon is the HR manager and has access to that document. So Tavon's really smart. You guys know that by now, right? And so he's not gonna on purpose share that with somebody who shouldn't be able to see it. He's just communicating with his normal HR team. They're all able to see it. But Tavon needed to communicate with Kelsey, who's an external vendor, about a project they're working on. And so Tavon's been working on another document that has to do with that, right? And Tavon went to send an email to Kelsey and was in such a hurry as he was going through because he had to get to another meeting that he actually made a slight error. He attached the wrong document to that email. Tavon's allowed to do that because Tavon's the HR manager and Tavon has permissions to do that. So nothing is stopping him or helping him stay safe, right? Sensitivity labels can help in that arena because a sensitivity label can be marked to say that if this document ever leaves where it is or ever tries to go outside the organization, then it absolutely needs to be encrypted so no one else can be able to see it or get to it. Or when he tries to attach it to Outlook, we want Outlook to say to him, Tavon, I know that you're really smart, but I don't think you should be attaching this document to this email. So don't do that. Stop that. So that's important, right? Okay, so those are things that we want you to consider inside of there. You need to have those conversations ahead of time. And then the last one there is Copilot as well, and then data governance along with that, right? So being able to make sure that Copilot is going to be able to adopt your environment very easily. So those who have like tons and tons and tons of Microsoft Teams, the question we would ask to you is, do you know what's on each of those teams before you turn on Copilot? Do you know whether how each of those is secured and who has access to those, right? So if you can't answer that question in a reasonable way, or if you're not sure the owners of those teams even know, then I would say you need to do some due diligence before you turn on Copilot there, right? And then maybe investigate sensitivity labels to try to help you kind of govern that a little bit. But even if you did a data governance exercise, what's going to happen at the end of that exercise, you're going to realize that you need to back up a few steps and then start maybe with content types, manage metadata, figure out the retention aspect of it, and all that kind of stuff as part of your data governance as well. And some of those things might come before you actually turn on Copilot. All right. Okay. So I'm going to say right now we're at our end time, but we're going to keep going and get this last part done real quick. And then we'll have you just send our questions, or if you have a question that you've placed into the chat, we'll actually follow up and reply to those as well. Or we'll make another video just for all of the replies. We'll do that. We've done that before. All right, last thing. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Perfect. Okay, one other question that we need to ask is to be or not to be. Some BTB scenarios here that we're going to cover if Tavon wants to jump ahead and go and give us some of those.
Sure. So just for a little fun context, that's my favorite slide in this presentation, to be or not to be. So a couple things that we need to make sure we consider with B2B. But before I get into that, if anyone's not aware, by B2B, we're really talking about external sharing, business to business, inviting people to work with us who aren't in our company. So SharePoint can certainly be a place for external collaboration. It can be a place where we say, hey, this particular SharePoint site, we're going to let you invite external users. We can even control that a little bit and say, we only want people from this certain domain, or we only want certain people allowed to do that inviting. And SharePoint can be a very powerful collaboration tool with outside users in that way. But at the same time, Teams can also be used for external collaboration. Right? I mentioned that we can invite users into that Microsoft group. Those can be guest users. Guest users are just those people who aren't in our organization who we want to kind of work with and share resources with. So we can use both platforms for some of this external collaboration. And they certainly both have, draws to them for outside collaboration. You saw how much context SharePoint can help give our information using pages and things like that in ways that Teams doesn't really do. You saw how Teams can be a great place to chat and have messages going back and forth. So I think both are certainly valid platforms to consider for these B2B scenarios. But that begs a question, doesn't it? For a lot of that external sharing, what I want you guys to really consider is, are we actually going to be using the Teams features, or did we just want to share the Files tab? Did we just want to share documents with some of those external users? In a lot of cases, we found that, when we're doing that external sharing and ongoing external collaboration with another company, what we're really doing is trying to get away from emailing files back and forth. And in those cases, I think SharePoint might be the way that I'd recommend you go, because you're not really leveraging everything that Teams can do. And we, again, want to avoid that accidental oversharing of that Microsoft group. Anything that you'd want to add on top of that?
No, I think you're spot on. I think if you, in every case that we've had where a client has been using Teams for external sharing, we just ask that simple question: are you using the rest of the chat features? Is that really what you want to be able to do? They're using the chat features and all the other features that come with Teams. And if that is, then yeah, this is a great place for it. If you're not, it's possible that you want to do that in a SharePoint site, because you can pre-format that. You can set it up so that one library in there is accessible by the client and one is not, right? So you can do a lot of extra things inside of there, plus build other such things inside of there that they might be useful to them. So you just have to make a decision. We're not saying either one is bad. We're certainly not doing that. We're just saying you need to make a decision. Make a decision.
And
Figure out your governance around that, and then go forward.
and with that as well, one thing that you might be wondering in the back of your mind is, okay, maybe you've convinced me to use SharePoint for my external collaboration, but I don't want to have another team in Teams that my HR department has to go to find those external documents. Well, like we showed you earlier, we can plug an existing SharePoint library into Teams as a tab, right? So we can still give them that good experience for our internal users while getting the best out of SharePoint for sharing with those outside users as well.
Yep. Awesome. So make sure, again, just some other things to consider. Make sure you have governance around either one of those approaches. Think about it first. Enforce the cleanup of users. So audit your security is what we're saying there. Make sure you know who can share and who cannot share, those types of things. So the sharing settings inside of SharePoint, and in Teams. And then again, maybe use sensitivity labels to make sure that you're not accidentally oversharing and sending things out of the company that shouldn't be outside of it. All right, so just some final wrap up things here. Again, just taking you back to what we said at the beginning, how do you think about Teams, right? Is it that place that we store files, or is it the place that we communicate about data, about information that we have? And that could be files plus other stuff, right? And maybe that mind shift gives you a different outlook on how Teams should actually be used. Make sure you got governance in there. Governance for all. Make sure you have governance inside of there. And then think about your future state as well. Like, I need to be able to do retention at some point. I need to be able to do sensitivity labels at some point. Is what I'm doing currently going to support that in the best way or the easiest way to be able to implement it, right? And again, we'll just say it one more time. Teams and SharePoint together, that is the best route to go. It just makes it for a much better experience inside your environment. All right. So I know that we ran out of time and we won't do questions now. Normally we would just stay on here and do questions, but unfortunately today is a day that we all have to go get on. Oh, at least I have to go get on a flight. So, and so we'll take all your questions that are inside of the chat, and we will go and make another video and post that and send it to you so you guys can see all the answers that we have for that. We're happy to do that for you. Here's the last slide, and Kelsey, go ahead and you can wrap us up.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Jared said, we'll be figuring out how to make sure we get all of your questions answered, because there's a ton and they're fantastic. You can always reach out to me first if you would like to get those answered. But everyone will get a recording. We'll get the recording of this webinar and a copy of the slides as well. So yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and reach out, but we will also make sure we figure out how to get those answers to you as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks, all.
everyone.